so that you can get the best or the most out of these large language models without really using Python or any other kind of like pro code developer platform. We want to make sure for security, for privacy, and for accuracy reasons to always have the human in the loop. So right now, I feel like AI is more like a useful intern that you have. A lot of times they can be very sophisticated and, they can be an intern with a master's or an intern with a PhD. So having that kind of like breadth and depth of knowledge. But a lot of the critical thinking, a lot of the subject matter expertise that we humans have, cannot be replicated at this point.
Hello and welcome to Horizons, the World Geospatial Industry Podcast. My name is Aaron Addison and I'm the Executive Director for WGIC. On this episode of the podcast, I'm joined by Psalti to talk about all things AI within geospatial and Earth observation. Welcome, Eve. Welcome to the Horizons Podcast by the World Geospatial Industry Council. It's great to have you joining us here today. We're got very good feedback from your presentation at our Horizons event back in Denver in late April, and just wanted to see if we could take a few minutes and dive a little bit deeper into some of the topics that you've raised while we were in Denver together. I think there's a lot of still uncertainty, but also a lot of people that are currently searching for information around some of the AI topics that you brought up, and yeah, just be able to get into it a little bit more. So thank you for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Great to be here. And looking forward to talking about AI in the geospatial data side, as it's because the whole technology is evolving really fast, and it's already transforming quite a few industries, from logistics to agriculture to urban planning, climate science. So there is a lot to unpack.
For sure. I think we're seeing that same thing, in our work and around the world. And that maybe is a good place to start for us, because I know when I talk to people, a lot of times they maybe feel like I'm already too far behind. I sort of missed the boat, so to speak. I need to take a lot of training. I need to be an expert. I need to get a PhD before I have any chance of even beginning to understand this thing. And it's just this sort of, and that's once they kind of come to that point, then it may be too intimidating, or it may be, feels like it's too much to try to even tackle. Are we still at a point where we need to be a data science expert, or that people need to have a specific type of expertise to even get started?
It's definitely worth having some basic understanding of AI principles. I think for every role out there, but right now I think you can really use and activate a lot of AI capabilities by using products that you use every day. Like from a Microsoft standpoint, what we're doing is we're integrating AI capabilities from our Azure AI services, the OpenAI service, and others directly into the first-party products that we have, whether it's Teams, PowerPoint, Outlook. So, when you have Teams, you can have speech transcription and captioning to capture notes directly integrated into the experience. You can also design a presentation, using a lot of our computer vision capabilities. You can, log into your Windows device, with biometric detection and identity verification, again, through our Azure AI services. So we can do a lot of work, without really having kind of like that deep data science expertise. And another category of tools that I would highly recommend for non-developers or for citizen developers, as we call them, is the whole Copilot suite. Right now, I think there is a Copilot for everything, and whether you're using Microsoft 365, or you're using the Power Platform, the security, GitHub, there is kind of like an easy plug and play, drag and drop type of experience so that you can get the best or the most out of these large language models without really using Python or any other kind of like pro code, developer platform.
Great. I like the citizens approach, definitely helping people see themselves and what's going on here. And it's great to know that you don't have to be an expert really to get started with these tools, because I think the more we can lower that barrier of entry into these types of technologies, the more approachable, of course, that they become. And I maybe I could get you to go one step further here. You brought up some coding, and I think that's an area where people are a little bit confused. You might be able to help us understand the difference between, is AI going to write code for me and then I just run it? Or what do we say when we talk about things like assisted coding? And how
Yeah.
does that all work, and what's different and what's the same about that compared to what we do today?
Yeah, I would say that right now the interesting thing of what we're all experiencing that there is a lot of choice. These large language models that were developed like 3, 4 years ago, now they're getting smaller, more efficient, smarter, faster. The barrier to entry is also smaller because they're becoming less expensive. So I think this is the right time to start experimenting with the various LLMs out there. And there are many. What we do from our end is providing kind of like, the right entryway, kind of like with a model catalog to access all of the relevant and kind of like, best in class LLMs, whether it's the ones that we're getting from our collaboration with Azure OpenAI, with both the multimodal ones that we see, like GPT-4 and all the subsequent ones that are coming, that you can interact with them by inserting images, video, audio. So now there is kind of like a richer way to interact with these LLMs beyond the text. Also, we have the reasoning LLMs. These are for more kind of like math and science type of examples and calculations. They go deeper, they provide more detailed outputs, which is really, really interesting. We have models from Meta, the Llama herd, Mistral, even Grok, and many, many others. There are, thousands that are open source model from the Hugging Face community. We also see an interesting new category that we developed in our research side, but I think it's getting traction in broader use cases, which is the small language models. This is the Phi family, PHI, and the interesting thing about them is that they are trained in industry specific data. They are very small and easy to fine tune, which is, always a good thing. And they can run offline. They can also run very well in edge devices. So a lot of times where we have cameras or other kind of like, edge devices that work really well with or collect geospatial data, I think the SLMs, the small language models, will be an interesting option to use to analyze this data for whatever the use case is. So there are different options out there. Now, to your question is, is this going to write itself, or is it going, how autonomous all of this is? I say that, right now we still see the importance of having the human in the loop. This is critical because these models can be very powerful, they can be very accurate, but also they can be, there is some volatility that is associated with the output. So you want to make sure that you introduce almost an experimentation culture in your group, in your company, in your team, so that you have kind of like a closed loop process to evaluate these models, evaluate the outputs, depending on kind of like the prompt and the set of use cases that you have, and make sure that you always evaluate and incorporate the feedback to kind of like hone in the accurate results on the other hand. So, is the goal towards, an autonomous set of agents? Probably yes. And I think that's the aspiration, but I don't think we're here yet. We want to make sure for security, for privacy, and for accuracy reasons to always have the human in the loop. So right now, I feel like AI is more like a useful intern that you have. A lot of times they can be very sophisticated and, they can be an intern with a master's or an intern with a PhD. So having that kind of like breadth and depth of knowledge, but a lot of the critical thinking, a lot of the subject matter expertise that we humans have, cannot be replicated at this point. So it's good to have both.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're definitely still in, and for the foreseeable future, we'll be in a trust but verify type of a world where you don't want to just blindly accept the outputs of AI. But I do wonder, if the goal is to be fully autonomous, where the outputs maybe can be turned into actionable decisions with or without a human in the loop. Um, how do we get to sort of qualifying the outputs of some of these models to say, not unlike say a weather forecast where, there's a 60% chance of rain today. Do we have anything like that for AI models to say this model is 60% confident or 70% confident, and then really putting it back to the decision maker to say, here you can make a well-informed decision, but it's not making the decision for you necessarily, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's really essential. I think as we see advancements and rapid developments, in this AI capabilities, we want to make sure that we have the right guardrails in place. So first, I would highly recommend kind of like, a strategy around governance. So it's, let's not jump in the deep end, using these AI models without having a center of excellence when it comes to AI practices, a governance strategy. Then you also need the rules to standardize this AI requirements. And, you need training and best practices sharing across the different departments that are using these AI capabilities. And then you need the tools for implementation, for implementing AI. So in terms of principles, what we've done that, we are sharing kind of like, as one option to take with others is, back even in 2018, way before the, big generative AI and agentic AI waves, we developed a set of principles around responsible AI. That's how we called it. It wasn't about, it was about trustworthy, but it was also beyond trust. It was about making sure that we have the right security and privacy, components in how we were developing these AI models, that, we were being inclusive in the type of data and the scenarios that we were including in training these LLMs or these models. Like back then, there weren't like large language models. Also, introducing transparency and traceability to avoid any bias, to incorporate fairness. And this became kind of like our way of having a checklist to ensure all research and engineering teams were developing these AI services and tools with the right principles in mind. So that's kind of like one piece. And then when it comes to tools, uh, you always, want to have kind of like, almost like a responsible AI dashboard. What we have and we use, and we work with our customers to use as well, is this responsible AI dashboard that that gives you kind of like almost like a single pane of glass where you can bring in a plethora of different AI models and you can test them for fluency, for accuracy, for coherence. This helps you identify and diagnose and mitigate any model errors. So this gives you kind of like another checkpoint on top of like, whatever is built into the LLM that you're using. And in most cases, what we see customers using 2 or 3 models at the same time. So now you are amplifying the risk. So, you really want to have kind of like the right evaluation tools to make sure that, you're testing and benchmarking for the things that you want to look for. And then another interesting tool that I highly recommend as well is the content safety tool, especially because you want to safeguard the experience for your users internally, whether they are people in HR or people in sales or wherever the department that are not necessarily part of your IT ecosystem, but also for your customers. So this uses advanced language and vision models to detect language around hate, violence, self-harm. So it flags them. And, there is kind of like a grade that you can, go up and down and make it as lenient or as harsh as you need. So you can dial it up and down depending on, what your use case is. So that's another kind of way to safeguard the experience. So think of it like, in terms of having a governance strategy when it comes to AI and having the right tools to make sure that you enable your developers, your data scientists, but also your users and your customers to have the most, safe and secure experience.
Oh, that's both exciting and interesting, but also uh, gives pause for a lot of thought to process everything because you really can't. I don't think you can overstate the need for proper governance and ethical use in some of these tools because it's, we see that in the geospatial industry when people make maps, nobody ever questions a map. They're like, oh, if somebody made a map, it must be right. But of course, there are things that people do with maps, just like with other data sets, that may or may not be ethical. And I think it's really important to stress that governance piece, the ethics piece, and also that trust but verify piece coming out of some of these great capabilities comes also great responsibility. So that might be a good place to talk a little bit about anomalies and hallucinations with AI. I know in many conversations that I've been a part of, people tend to use the word anomaly or hallucination as a full stop. Like we can't go any further because there's the chance that this tool may hallucinate. Um, but of course, as you mentioned earlier, some QA, QC steps that can be taken. You can compare one model against another, and so forth. And so I think this also becomes not just in looking at video or speech, but as we get more into the area of edge computing, if we're deploying small models, how do we verify the small model against a bigger model to make sure we're not getting a spurious observation or reading or something from the edge that would otherwise contaminate the overall data set.
Yeah. No, there's always a risk, and there is no easy answer. That's why I said, I think we all have to be comfortable in this new experimentation era because, before it was we would code something and we knew that the outcome would be one set of outcomes. And now you can have the same prompt, but, the outputs can vary depending on, how the model was trained, when it was trained, when the training stopped. Um, One thing I think, to safeguard against hallucinations or data drifts or whatever it is to fine tune the model that you're using. And there are multiple techniques. You can really, use the prompt, to inject your own kind of like documents, your own high quality vetted data sets. This will help reduce the randomness and make the model more domain aware, especially if you have specific use cases that, you have specialized data around. So you can further educate and further train the model to kind of like know its domain boundaries, if you will. The other one that is a little bit more kind of like advanced, but we see a lot of customers and organizations do it, is using RAG. So instead of relying of the model memory, you retrieve the right information and you generate grounded answers. So this is another way to kind of like, use internal knowledge bases, geospatial databases, APIs. And also if you're using real-time information, whether it's flight information or, I don't know, weather information from up-to-date sources, this is another way to ground the model in these kind of like specific up-to-date sources and limit any hallucinations or any kind of like ad hoc results that they might yield.
If we could stay on that for just a second, because I know, again, when I speak to different people, they're very concerned that if I upload my documents, if I upload my data, then it's available to the entire world. Is this a myth? Is this true? Is it somewhere in between?
That's a good question, and it actually depends on how you deploy this. Um, So, for example, if you use kind of like an open source model that has kind of like, open weights, it means that whatever you are injecting and whatever you're putting in and how you're customizing it, then this will also be available for others, right? If you want to use these models or any of these capabilities within your own tenant, it means that you are the only one that will have access to this information. No one will be able to access it or see it or share it or use it to train any future model. So it's always good to know how where you're accessing these, where you're deploying them, and be aware of kind of like the options that you have. But definitely there are a lot of options to run it in your own domain, your own tenant, even if you're running it on the cloud, so that nobody else has access. But these are good questions to ask, right? Like, definitely ask, what are how enterprise ready this service is, meaning how manageable it is, right? We forget that, we should ask the same questions like we would ask any other kind of like, AI or, any other cloud service. Will I be able to, use my subscription or deploy it on my tenant? Will I be able to assign users and access to specific user groups? So how manageable the service is? Will I be able to, secure it? How does it scale up and down depending on the needs that I have? Can it handle large amounts of data and traffic? How available it is? How reliable it is? If I'm running it for my critical applications, will it go down or will it throttle my capacity? And then a set of questions around privacy, right? What happens to the data when I insert data in the prompt or whenever I fine tune or customize the models that I use? Who has access to it? And how can I safeguard this experience for my developers, for my users, and for my customers?
Yeah, that's great to hear. I know a lot of conversations going on around things like sovereignty and data sovereignty right now, but in some ways it also reminds me of the same kinds of conversations we had with the rise of cloud computing and being HIPAA compliant, things like that. I mean, people said, "Oh, you can't put health records in the cloud." Well, that problem was solved by the major cloud providers, and yet that sort of myth persisted that no, you can't do it. But it was being used as sort of a uh, a way to derail or distract the conversation, rather than really trying to pay attention to what was and wasn't a capability. So it's good to hear that those things can be private when they need to be private, or you can opt in and have them be public when they need to be public. And that really helps alleviate, I think, a lot of the concerns that some people have around incorporating their own data into these models, which of course can give them a higher quality output if they're able to do that. So I think that's a really great point. If we could, let's change gears just a little bit for a moment. Um, I'm hearing a lot about agents. I've heard the term agentic. I don't even know if that's a real world word yet, but people are using it. Um, and then I've also heard these terms in conjunctions with edge computing, with packages, with all kinds of different jargon, I'll just say, that surrounds this right now. Can you help walk us through some of what all this means and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, agentic is a word now. Uh, so AI agents is kind of like came in the foresight probably like maybe a couple of years ago, and it's an exciting frontier not only for for the geospatial industry but across different industries as well. The interesting thing is that they go beyond traditional automation and they act almost autonomously, reasoning over kind of like a plethora of data. They can also coordinate tasks, and they can interact with other agents to drive the outcomes that we need. So there are a lot of scenarios that we see, in the geospatial industry and others. But the reason why I think we see the rise of agentic AI right now is because we had such great results and great traction with large language models. Large language models are still at the heart of the any AI agent in how you are using it, right? Because the LLM is still the brain of the agent. The difference with the agent is that point you can point them towards kind of like, the different knowledge bases or the different data sets that you have, and they can access, not only this kind of like, data sources that you have. They can have access to web search, they can have access to calendars, to calculators, to other agents. The interesting thing, there are two interesting things about agents that are helping us really bring an LLM to life and activate an LLM. The first thing is the memory. So they retain information from past interactions to inform the decisions they make going forward. So as you use them more and more, and they, retain this information from these interactions, they become much smarter and more intelligent. The second piece that makes them really interesting is the ability to plan, to act, and to react in real time. So they take action. They can schedule an appointment, they can schedule a trip, they can book a hotel, they book like a coordinated trip. So they can do a lot of planning, they can do a lot of collaboration. Also, you can use multiple agents in conjunction and in collaboration with each other. You can have a scheduling agent, you can have a communication agent, you can also have a quality control agent. You can have an agent managing multiple agents. The human is still in the loop. I don't think that we're at a stage where we see autonomous agents. I feel like, you still need to have that human for the final quality control to make sure that, the actions that these agents are taking are accurate and they're yielding the results that we need. But I think the fact that they remember and they can learn from previous interactions, and the fact that they can act and they can, take actions, real-time actions, will help us tremendously with multiple scenarios, right? I mean, there are, what we see, for example, is monitoring agents. So you can have agents that receive and review satellite information. They can, take decisions, or they can kind of like detect or report any illegal deforestation, for example. What we also see is agents being used in disaster response. So we've seen some examples with earthquakes, with fires, where, there was a dynamic and an intelligent kind of like response based on a flag that came from an agent. So, and so forth and so on. There are a lot of like scenarios we see, across many other in industries as well. We're at the beginning of it. So there is a lot of experimentation from, both the AI providers, but also, with a broader ecosystem of, organizations and partners that are building kind of like this set of agents that they can be used as a template. So I think we're only scratching the surface with this, and we're going to see much more of that going forward.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure you're seeing lots of interesting customer potential use cases in your uh, weekly meetings with various folks, and some of those are, I think one of my concerns is that people are thinking about or treating AI sometimes as if it's a little bit, a salt shaker or some condiment, where if I just sprinkle a little bit of AI on this thing, it's all going to be better. Because they don't really seem to understand that it's the change and the possibility that is in front of them. And I've seen this in other technology trajectories where people are like, no, I just want to do what I was doing before. I want to do it now with AI, instead of really thinking about what the possibilities of AI might bring to, solving problems that they're working on. But you had mentioned, um, you know, prompt engineering. You mentioned RAG, or the retrieval augmented generation. And then you mentioned a little bit about fine tuning. And it feels like maybe prompt engineering is on the low end of customization. Fine tuning, it seems like, is something that takes a bit more effort and knowledge to be able to do it. I guess, is that true? And then where do agents fit into sort of that continuum of complexity for customizations?
No, you're right. The prompt engineering, I think, is kind of like the simpler approach that we can take. You can get very creative, very precise, very specific with the prompt that you give. And so I think this is kind of like an art and a science that we see. Also, you can inject kind of like, your files, your data sets, and you can get a lot of interesting results. I think, with RAG, as I said, this is probably a way when you want to ground the model in real time, with real time information, I think that's, kind of like one way to do it. Also, yeah, so I think with RAG for up-to-date information, fine-tuning is basically is great at steering the model for specific tasks like data summarization in a specific format, or if you want to increase the quantity of examples that you want the model to be trained on. So, it depends kind of like, what the use case and what you're doing. Again, like, you can still have an LLM that is highly kind of like fine-tuned and customized and use it in an agent. So the agent will use the LLM, whether it's off the shelf or it's customized, and then it will take an action, so you can integrate it with a particular action. So take this information and then schedule a meeting, or take this information and I don't know, like schedule a call with the report on this. So it depends kind of like, I think you can take the results of the customization that you drove with the LLM, and you can bring it into an agentic format that will take a more kind of like proactive action.
So we've talked a lot about the systems and about the models and about the prompts, but we've also mentioned that there's still going to be humans in the loop. So maybe as we start to wrap up here today, um, let's talk a little bit about how that workforce is going to be trained, because obviously there's going to be a lot more need for even the prompt engineering, and then of course the more complex part of that as well. But how do we get from where we're at to where we need to be with regard to the workforce? And I know reskilling and upskilling is part of that, but also maybe some thoughts that you would have for young adults who are contemplating their career, seeing all of this exciting things happening with AI and prompts, and like where do they go from where they're at in order to be what the industry sometimes calls workforce ready.
Yeah. No, that's an ongoing conversation, and it's a difficult nut to crack, right? Because, we're seeing a fundamental shift. And I would say across all different roles, like, before we were thinking, well, it's only going to affect maybe knowledge workers or non-IT kind of like, staff. But now we see it affects developers too, because, a lot of times you can have an LLM write some basic code. So maybe you need like more of your advanced developers to, continue this work. So I think we see some disruption across all types of roles across IT departments or non-IT departments. I would say the only way to address it, because things are moving really fast, is to kind of like, understand kind of like what's coming down the pike, be in the know of new things that are coming into market, and try them out. There is no better way to kind of like get skilled, upskilled. by trying something out. And I would say, like, find your sweet spot as well. Not everybody should and could be, a developer. You can still be a business user, you can be a low code developer, you can be a no code developer, and still use AI tools to make your work easier, faster, to automate some of the more mundane things that you're doing. If you are a developer and you want to kind of like, use an agent to help you be more efficient in your documentation, that's great. If you are a business user and you want to kind of like, automate some of the uh, project management, kind of like reports that you're doing, it's great. You don't have to do everything from scratch. I think, we need to remove the bias from using AI in our everyday work. I think it's making us faster, more efficient, more productive. It frees us time, it frees us time to do more advanced work. So I would say, like, don't be afraid to use AI. Start at whatever level of comfort you have, and the most important thing is to find the problem. Like, what is the problem that you're solving, right? Is it like, you want to kind of like automate some more administrative work that you're doing? Is it like, you want to automate some of the reporting or the analytics so that you can spend more time in interpretations or kind of like, next strategic steps? And then figure out like how complex this use case is, because this will also address kind of like, which tool to use. And then worry about kind of like, how things get deployed and integrated. A good way that I've seen a lot of companies kind of introducing is a center of excellence, because there you're going to have pockets of innovation across multiple parts of your organization. So having kind of like a center of excellence where people can share their best practices, they can share information and learn from each other, and also learn from the mistakes that they're doing, so that they don't do it more often, is a great way to make sure that you're still using AI, but you're minimizing the risks from doing so.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. I think, we see, I'm seeing the need for domain experts. If you want to use AI for managing supply chain or for natural resource management or for health and safety, you just have to have that domain expertise, because those are the ones that are going to be able to form those questions that you mentioned that are so important.
Yeah.
And starting with the question instead of, so instead of having a solution in search of a problem, we actually have something that we want to try to figure out that we're having difficulty with, and we want to make sure uh, that we understand that question before we dive into the technology, really. Um, so the last thing, and we've touched on this in different ways, but I know you mentioned this in your remarks in Denver back in April. But maybe the the way we can wrap this up for this episode is to talk about building on top of that business objective, which of course then extends into a discussion around ROI. A lot of these technologies are significant disruptions in the way people do business today, both on the technology side and on the ramp up to the staffing side through the various methods we were just discussing. But how do I use the same things I've been using to measure ROI from implementation of AI and AI technologies, or am I looking at trying to come up with a completely different way to measure this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say, like, I would always start with a business need, right? That's why I said, like, the first thing to ask is like, what are we solving for? A lot of times I've seen uh, customers just jump into the technology because it's exciting, because, they want to try it out, or because, they believe that it will differentiate them with their competitors. And all of this can be absolutely true, but you need to point it in the right direction as well. So it depends on the business strategy that you have. Is the goal to increase the productivity of your teams? For example, if you're spending a lot of time kind of like managing contracts and agreements and extracting information, and a lot of it is manual, and there are a lot of flaws in the process, and you have teams and teams reviewing kind of like, multi-page documents and reports and contracts and agreements. Is this the right way to do it? Or can you use AI to increase the productivity? And then, the ROI will be kind of like, because we digitize the document process operations, we were able to, kind of like increase, this process by 80%, or we were able to increase the accuracy of this process by X%. So if you want, for example, on the other end, like, if you want to improve the customer uh, experience that you're driving, how do you, for example, personalize, your contact center? How do you use call analytics? How do you use, like, speech to text to transcribe calls? How do you use speech translation to, cover, multiple audiences across multiple geographies? How do you mine this information to drive the right analytics? So if customer experience and improving the customer experience is your goal, then, you use kind of like, KPIs that show the return on investment when it, comes to conversational AI, whether it's reducing your support calls, whether it's in, improving the training you're driving for your contact center agents, or improving the kind of like, the NPS or the customer satisfaction score that you have. So it definitely depends on what you're trying to do. I think kind of like the most common goals we see is increasing the productivity of internal teams, improving the customer experience for your customers, and also overall improving and automating processes when it comes to security or threat detection, video surveillance, anomaly detection, a lot of use cases associated with document processing, as I said, and of course with supply chain optimization.
Well, Eve, it's hard to believe, but we're at time already. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and Microsoft's perspectives on some of this just incredible possibilities and opportunities. Uh, not without our own responsibilities, but just an exciting area that is developing very quickly and helping us sort through some of that and better understand it for use cases within the geospatial and Earth observation markets and industries. So thank you very much, Eve.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Aaron.
Thanks for joining this episode of Horizons, the World Geospatial Industry Podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn as we continue to advance technology and policy matters relevant to the geospatial sector and create business opportunities for the industry. Thank you for joining us.